Alright, let's talk about some potential sampling problems that can lead to biased data. Some examples we talked about in class were convenience sampling. And I mentioned that one actually when we did problem 9. The example was eating in the cafeteria, but what can happen in convenience sampling if you just sample people close to you is that there may end up being patterns in why those people are all in the same place at the same time. And those patterns, when you pull out your data, like in the cafeteria example, may lead to underrepresenting some important groups who are in your population and should get representation. So that can lead to poor sampling. Another thing is voluntary sampling. This one's always an issue, or a difficult one, because if you're going to get people to give their opinions, in some ways they have to volunteer. But you need to be careful that they have enough motivation that you get good representation. One of the reasons I keep encouraging you to take the course surveys is that if I don't have a good representation or a complete sampling of the class, if there's not enough encouragement to participate, then the volunteers that just willingly go online and fill out that survey will tend to be the extremes, the ones who really like the class, or there aren't any of these, but the ones who don't like the class. So if you haven't done that survey, you should stop the video right now and go take that survey, because it's really important to me that I have a complete sample. Now, this is always a challenging thing. There are ways around it, like giving incentives. I don't believe in extra credit, but some people will give extra credit for participating, or you can offer monetary incentives, and I don't have enough money to give you that for participating, but there are lots of ways around that. Another issue is undersampling. And this one can be an issue. Some examples were in phone surveys. Often if you call people, an issue that can happen, say you're calling during the workday, is a lot of people can't answer their phones during the workday. And so what would happen if you did a telephone survey during the workday is you would overrepresent those who don't work during the day, and maybe those without jobs, and underrepresent those who work regular 8 to 5 jobs. And that could potentially bias your data. So you need to be careful of lots of these things. I'm sure there's others, but these are some of the main ones we've talked about. Next, we're going to talk about experimental designs. There are many of these. We're just going to look at a couple. One would be a simple random design. And in this case, you would just take your subjects who are going to participate and split them into 2 groups, or however many different treatments you've got. Say just treatment 1, treatment 2, however many there are, and you just randomly split that group into both, one getting treatment 1, one getting treatment 2. So there's nothing really special you're doing to select those. The second case would be a block design. In a block design, what you want to do is try and make sure you have particular groups represented. So one thing you might do in a block design is take all of the subjects who are willing, split them first according to some trait that you want to highlight. Maybe you want to highlight gender, so you want the females and males. So you split that group. That is not something you can do randomly. It's something that's just a fact about who they are. And then you randomly split those groups into the different treatments. It could be as many treatments as you've got. Right here I'm just drawing 2 treatments, but it could be even more. One of the challenges in this type of design is that you can see you end up with 4 different groups instead of 2. And not only does that make the analysis harder, but it also means you need a much larger pool of subjects in order to get reasonable size groups within there. So that can make that type of study difficult. The important thing, though, is it allows better representation of all the groups, and allows you to actually compare the males to females, or whatever your blocks are. Some examples of blocks could be things like gender, or race, or health level, or something that you can't randomly assign to your patients or subjects. Alright, the next question is two types of observational studies, and there's actually some very strong similarities. One is a just random survey. So this would be, I think of it as simple random. Some people give this a more complex name, but you really just take your whole population and you randomly give the survey out. So maybe you pick a bunch of phone digits randomly, call them, make sure you call at all hours of the day, and there's nothing else random about it. Another one might be a stratified sample. And in this case, you take your population and you split it into groups. Maybe you split your population into, again, you could split it into males and females, would be one strata. And then from each of these, you randomly sample and decide who to give your survey to. So again, you make sure that you represent not only the males fairly, but you represent the females. Now, if you're doing this randomly, simple random still represents both, but we don't have any choice to make sure they're both represented equally. The analysis gets more complicated, and sometimes it's harder to select, but you get more detailed information because you see each group separately. Another type of sampling is called cluster sampling, and in this case, you take your population, and you take that whole population and you divide it into very small groups. In some ways this is like stratified sampling, where you divide your population into groups, but what tends to be different is the groups are much smaller here. And then when you then in this one you randomly decide which group will participate in the study. So your randomization is in selecting the groups, and you only select some of these groups, not all of them, but then every single member of that group is selected to participate in the survey, whereas in stratified sampling, only some of the members of each group are selected.